Hey, my name is Erica McClure. I am a doctoral candidate at the University of Louisville. I'm also a BCBA, and I'm here with Dana Page, who is another doctoral candidate at the University of Louisville. We wanted to share with you the results of a recent linear regression model that we conducted, examining disciplinary data from a large urban school district in the state of Kentucky. We also want to talk about other research that's been done in this area and how our results reflect the results of previous research. And we also want to talk about a few takeaways from this body of research and things that school districts and individuals working with students can do to address disparities in discipline and inequity in these practices. So we did want to talk about previous research before discussing our own, especially noting that when we look at the data for the 2015-2016 school year, we know that approximately 2.7 million students received at least one out-of-school suspension. And even when we look at data since that year, we see that there's a continuing pattern in this data and that these numbers have significantly and steadily increased since the early 2000s. And we also know that when students are removed from the learning environment, that this has significant detrimental impact on students. So we know, again, that those removals from the classroom significantly impact students. So we would want to look for any disparities in how those disciplinary practices are implemented so that we can ensure one specific student population is not impacted more than other groups. So when we do look at disciplinary data, when multiple studies have looked at disciplinary data, what they have shown is that there's not only a disproportionate application to students from racial minorities, but there's also a disproportionate application to students with identified disabilities, students from low socioeconomic households, and that these disproportionalities have existed and increased over the last 40 years, which is basically when researchers began examining these disparities. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to take data from a local school district, and this again is a large urban diverse school district, and look at their 2017-2018 school year data. And we used a hierarchical linear regression model to examine their data to look specifically for disparities in their disciplinary practices. And what we actually observed what we've seen in other research at the national level. And we noticed that there was a statistically significant disparity, especially when we looked at Black students within the district. So we noticed that exclusionary discipline, specifically number of suspensions by school, that there was a disproportionate application to within schools that had a higher percentage of population of Black students, but also those number of students that were being suspended, a higher number of them were Black students. And again, when we look at disciplinary data beyond that school year, we find a similar pattern. So we know that these problems exist. We're seeing it not only at the national level, but again, through our own regression modeling, we're seeing it at the local level as well. So then districts and individuals working with districts might ask themselves, what can we do to address these disparities? Well, one thing we do know, again, based on multiple studies, is that awareness of the problem is simply not enough. So just looking at the data is not enough to change individual practices. What we really need to do is change how we're interacting with students, and how we're involving students in their educational setting. So one of the things that educators can do, they can change their use of praise and reprimands. What they can provide behavior-specific praise so that students know exactly what the expectations are for them in the classroom. Speaking of expectations, we want to make sure that the expectations that we are putting in place are functional and purposeful and are not just sort of based on the status quo and maybe based in expectations that we know are tied, that ignore certain cultural aspects of students. One of the things we can also do to increase cultural responsiveness is use tools like the personality matrix and a praise preference assessment in order to ensure that we're providing praise in ways that respect students' cultural differences, and also that we're recognizing that there are behaviors for students that may be universally unacceptable, meaning that they're not acceptable in any environment, and there may be some behaviors that are just situationally inappropriate. So again, these are all things that we can do to help increase equity in our disciplinary practices. Thank you.